Welcome to the Kingdom Women Podcast, a podcast by and for women who seek to fully and freely live the gospel reality of Christ's kingdom come. Through our candid conversations here, our desire is that our union with Christ will deepen and that his kingdom will come in us and through us, that we all may be free indeed. So tonight we're going to be talking about, in our theme here, relationships with our family. And we decided we're going to stick with talking about relating to our family of origin, because we can talk about our family of origin, we can talk about our current family, some of us with raising families, or we have, even Gwen has children that are grown and she has the whole grandchild dynamic and all that, that stage of life. But we'll talk about relating to our families of origin. We all recognize that sometimes relationships with family of origin can be difficult to navigate. Our own stories intertwined with that can be difficult. And so we just thought it'd be a good topic to discuss and talk about and kind of hash out here. So grab your coffee and join us. And the question we want to kind of circle around is like, how does a godly woman, a kingdom woman, relate to her family, maybe particularly if there's pain associated with that, or if there's been difficulty or chaos in her family relationships. How do we relate to that?
Oh, I know that it's a little difficult some days. I know that there's been background stuff in my family, but a lot of it years past. But I think that I act like a different person around my family, and it's different from what I act around my friends. So, whether I'm maybe being honest or not, it's something that I've had to think about and reconcile with myself and my current way of relating to my family, because I have been thinking about it. Like, how do I act? Can I act genuine and authentic around them? Or am I putting on kind of a front or remaining in the background even just so that I don't draw attention to myself? It's kind of weird. Not negative, or I don't know how to say it. What?
So you're saying that maybe there's been some difficulty in relationships, and so you're trying to decide if you're defaulting to something that feels safe, but maybe isn't the most healthy or wise.
Mm-hmm. Very much, yeah.
Or authentic.
Authentic, yeah.
But maybe it really isn't safe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's.
I don't really feel safe being truly authentic in my family. I'm a pretty honest person. I think I'm not sure how to say what I mean. Families can be very critical. Friends often aren't. And I understand what Rosanna's saying about not being fully oneself. And so maybe we can try to kind of determine whether that's unhealthy or wise.
I kind of have a thought about that I drew with regards to like a diagram that I had in mind that I drew with regards to things like racial divisions in the church, but I think it applies to these kind of things where there's a chasm between people. So like when you have a relationship and there is a huge, it's a cliff and there's a chasm in between, like there's a gap. Oftentimes, if that gap was created by someone who was, who did something wrong, who in that relationship in like an abusive way, whether it's like racism or whether it's like emotionally or and all that, they're the ones who created the gap. And so you could forgive them if that gap in that relationship exists, but you cannot take a bridge and go over to their side, as in to go back into that situation of unhealthiness or abuse, because that's not what is supposed to happen. That's just going back into a situation where you're just going to become a victim again. So I kind of feel like you can forgive, but when it comes to building back a relationship, often I do think that it takes change, and it takes them being the first one to sort of, at least acknowledge that there was a wrong, for example, or to build or to create a place where reconciliation can happen. If not, you're just going back into that same situation where you're just going to be, hurt or all that again. And I know that Christians are supposed to always, forgive and always give people second chances when they genuinely repent. But also when it comes to reconciliation, I do think that I guess church culture, I feel, always puts the responsibility on people who have been hurt to bridge out and to reach out across that chasm to the person who
Yeah.
hurt them, even when they persist in hurting them or persist in doing something wrong, or
Yeah.
don't see things from the other person's perspective.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I think in
Well,
my
that's-
case, a lot of the things that I think the dynamic that happened is I left home at maybe 18 or so. I was really young, and I have not lived with my family or even been around my family a lot since then, because I live farther away, and well, I see them once or twice a year, but it's not like they really know who I am anymore. And who I was at 18 is definitely not who I am at 45 or 47, whatever. So it's I don't relate to my family like I do my friends, because we're not that close, and they don't really know me for who I am.
Mhm. Mhm.
I mean, I just, that mental picture that I have, I guess I'm sure there's like flaws in it, and there's a situation that doesn't fit. You guys are free to
Well,
disagree
as-
too.
I think
Well-
go ahead.
No, that's all right. Go ahead, Sarah.
I think the biggest place where I think that breaks down, Rebecca, is where I'm sitting over here on my side of the cliff, and I see myself as the one who's been injured or has been offended. And I have my reasons for thinking that, but my family member on the other side of the chasm
Mm.
feels that I'm the one who's broken the relationship by the choices that I've made or the direction that I've gone. And so here you are in two different places, both looking across at the other, thinking, you broke this up. And,
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking of that originally in terms of like abuse, or like when there's clearly one person in the wrong. When it's you're right that when it's a relationship that has two people who are at odds with each other, that's just gonna make things worse.
yeah.
Well, and another thing, relationships with family are the ones that began with little boundaries. Like, as in, if I've known somebody from a baby on up, I'm going to assume that I know them.
Mhm.
And if they change, I may not be as flexible, because after all, they're family. They know that I know them. They're going to take everything I say just at point blank value, because of assuming things about me, or that I may assume things about them. You tend to have less tact with your family, or less
Filter.
boundaries rather than normal ones.
Less filter, and we also tend to, with our families, they're locked. I think my family has sometimes looked at me like I wasn't always the nicest kid or the nicest sister. I had my flaws too, and my family, some of my family has tended to look at me as that is still who I am.
Right.
I also moved out at 19, and
Mhm.
series of changes and growth and all this, but they were not with me in that change and in that growth. And
Mhm.
so to them, and do we do that to our own family members too,
Mhm.
where we can't get across this chasm, because we still are perceiving them as the person they once were.
Yeah.
And especially for those of us that live at a distance from our families, we're not
Mhm.
walking, with them. We're not living in the same community. We don't know what is impacting them. We don't know what what ways they're seeking out growth and
Mhm.
healing. And so in our mind's eyes, they also are the person they've always been. And it's hard for
Mhm.
us to maybe see them for who they really are. And so if that's the chasm we're talking about, like I connect with Rebecca's illustration, because especially in cases of like, or if there's been abuse, say an abusive
Yes.
parent, and that has never been acknowledged, that has never been by the abuser, that's never been named or owned. You're here, they're there, and you can honor, you can maintain what relationship you can, but that gap is just going to be there. And I think that's
Mhm.
just a reality. But what if it's not to that degree? What if there's just this gap of I'm viewing you the way I think you still are, and maybe you've changed, or you are viewing me that way. How do we get across that chasm?
Mhm. How do we open those conversations? I think it is
Yeah,
really important. I think a lot of it has to do with letting your guard down and being willing to say, hey, I don't know you. It's been 10 years since we had a good conversation. Tell me ways that you've changed and grown. Tell me questions that you have about me and my life, and at least opening the door. And I guess for me, yes, there's some relationships where there was clear hurt and abuse or whatever you want to say in my personal family dynamic, but most of the gap is there because of a lack of communication, or even a fear of communication, because if we tell where we're really at, will they accept
Mhm.
us? Will they want to be around us? Will I have even the tenuous relationship that we currently hold?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a temptation to just protect myself and not even try to go there, not even try
Yeah.
to have that conversation.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But when you do, that's when the other, I guess for myself, I come from a family of 10. And so it's hard. I mean, 10 siblings plus my parents. So it's obviously hard to stay in close contact with 9 other adults now.
Mhm.
But yet, sometimes, like you said, we do still have that perspective that they're still here. But I know how much I've changed and grown since I left home 16 years ago, and or 17. And I can assume that they're not the same person that they used to be either. So we have to, as long as there's not ongoing hurts and repetitive bad behaviors
Right.
that militate against rebuilding a relationship, it's important to reach out and at least open that door.
Mm-hmm. I just feel kind of the urge to share to share a little bit of my story with my sister. I have one sister, she's 10 years younger than me. There was a lot of chaos in our home growing up, and so I was a teenager when she was young, and a lot of turmoil, and we were not close. And I was not always very kind to her at all. And of course that marked her, and that marked our relationship. And I resented the closeness that it seemed like she had with my mom. My mom, and she was my mom's youngest. So of course, to me, it felt like my mom favored her. Fast forward, we're both adults. And we had mended when she was probably 19, 20. No, she was 20 couple, and came and spent a weekend with me. And I attempted to talk through some of the things, make amends, own the ways that I recognized that I had hurt her, and trying to bridge that chasm that I had helped to create. Yeah. And so we began to develop a relationship, but this was nothing deliberate on her part. And I think, maybe before that we before we broadcast this, I need to check in with her and make sure it's okay that I share this piece of it, because this is her story too. But there's such a beautiful ending, and I don't think she'll mind me sharing these particulars. I felt in the years after that, in the probably 10 years after that, I felt like in some of the ways that she related to me, that she still was viewing me as kind of the bossy, resentful, mean big sister. And I felt like I could not overcome that. And so our relationship was, um, we had a relationship, but I didn't trust her. I didn't trust her, and it felt like she didn't fully trust me either. A couple of years ago, maybe 3, 4 years ago, I don't even know what started the conversation, but we began to talk about, in a way we never had before, our family dynamics and what had shaped us. And she was, I had done some therapy and healing, and she had also been doing some therapy and talking through some of this stuff. And so we were both at a really good place where we could talk through these dynamics and start to, both of us, reach across the chasm. And it was really, really neat to be able to process some of the painful things that had happened in our family. For me, for the first time, to hear what it was like from her perspective, 10 years younger than me, and for her to hear my experience as one of the older kids, kind of forging the way through some of this stuff, and listening to each other and really understanding. It was powerful. And my sister has become my best friend. And 10 years ago, I didn't think that would ever happen. So it's just the grace of God. It's not like we're somehow, we got this all together and whatever, but I am so thankful. And what you were saying, Sarah, about we have to be willing to take the risk, to have the conversations and bring some of this stuff, to be vulnerable.
And be open to the idea that maybe they've changed too, and maybe they've matured,
Yes.
and not always
Yes.
keep them where they were.
Yeah.
I know that happened with me with one of my sisters, who I don't know that she'll ever listen to this either, but it was really meaningful to me a couple of years ago. She's the sister. Well, yeah, I won't go into our exact relation.
Family order.
Yes. But let's just say that she had always been super, she was a great, sweet girl, very much under authority. And so I never felt like she really understood some of the dynamic, under authority. You all know what I mean, like Bill Gothard under authority. Okay. So and she had gotten married young and stepped right into a marriage relationship. And I always felt like she didn't trust me and didn't understand why I had made some of the choices I made in my 20s, and to step away from home and start out making some adult decisions. So for 10 years or more, we didn't really, I helped her have her babies, and we had a relationship back and forth like that, but we never talked about the deep heart things. And we had been pretty close as teenagers. But I just felt like it was a threat to her, and even like it would have made her feel disloyal to my parents, to maybe just their whole paradigm. But she reached out a couple years ago. She came and visited me, and she said, she started asking questions, why did you do what you did? And her openness, and I shared some of what I had experienced, and she said, or I know what it was. I shared some of my current concerns with my relationship, specifically with my parents, and my inability to communicate openly and honestly with them on some levels. And she's like, well, it's not like that for me. And I just had to walk away for a little bit, because I was like, it's never been like that for you. You never broke those boundaries. You never had that rupture. And so you can't understand what I'm talking about, and then I came back to her, and the first thing she said to me when I came back was, it wasn't that way for me, but I believe you. And I know that your dynamic was different than mine. And to be able to say that to someone else, I can't relate. I did not experience that from my parents or from this sibling, but I believe you. And I understand that this was a real dynamic in your life. Creates a whole space for relationship growth and understanding.
Those are some of the most powerful words
Mhm.
I
Yes.
believe you.
Yep.
Those are such powerful words.
Yep.
Healing
For sure.
words.
Yep.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Do you all ever think about like the differences in your lives that I only have two brothers. I don't have sisters, and they're both
Mhm.
into like the trucking world, which I really know nothing about. They both they live very, very different lives than what I do, and that's been a barrier because what do you talk about when you're with your siblings? You know, like me, it's like, okay, I go to work every day. I come home, I eat supper, I go to work every day.
Yes.
Our lives don't intersect and they don't have a lot in common. And so that's one of the things I think about sometimes when I discuss, you know, or when I'm with my family, like, wow, what do I even talk about, you know? But I do really enjoy my brothers and I feel like they've really become successful and very happy. You know, both of them are married to wonderful ladies, and it's just so neat to see. I know with my own relationship not working out well, I'm delighted that I have
Mhm.
brothers who married great partners. Rebecca, do you have one sibling?
Yeah, I just have a brother, just one.
Okay, so we're both from small families.
Yeah, not from giant mega families.
It wasn't a mega family back then. It was a quiverful family back
A quiverful. Yeah.
Ooh.
Um, so what do you guys like? I'm just curious if you've had some difficulty in your family, um, if there's been some turmoil and rupture and broken relationships, um, how do you guys handle like the whole issue of taking responsibility for, or yeah, maybe the guilt that accompanies that? Like, I should have,
then.
if I would have been a better daughter, if I would have been a different sister, if I would have done this or that. Yeah, what do y'all do with that? With maybe the guilt is if maybe it's not even legitimate guilt, maybe there was nothing you could do, but that tends to accompany ruptured relationships, is just
Mhm.
you have to examine what part did I play in that? How do you guys handle that? Or
Wow,
what advice would you
I
give somebody who says, well, it's all my fault, I could have done differently?
Mhm.
I always say when you grow, you change. So um, yeah, I know that I was probably a difficult child. Um, and I had some difficult things to work through with my relationship, with my dad especially. But one of the things that I did was deliberately own my own behavior. I remember when I was 20, you know, I wrote a letter to my dad pretty well saying, you know, Dad, I recognize that there were breakdowns in our family and that I didn't do my part when I was a child or a teenager, you know, older child, not, well, you're a little child, it's not really your fault.
Mhm. Mhm.
But when you're a teenager and the way you respond back, I told him that I recognize where I yelled at him or where I rebelled and that I want to make my part right. My dad never answered me, and I don't ever expect him to acknowledge that. But um, and that's another maybe funky family dynamic. But I felt like I could lay that down. And am I at ease around him? No, but I own it, and I actually go out of my way to maintain a relationship there. Um, do I feel guilty now for the heartache and some of the pain that I went through as a child? No. Um, I I feel like I had to own that. Is that some of the reason that I tend to just maybe not know how to relate to my family? Probably. I mean, my family is great, and they're functional, and they all live close together. So I know that their family relationships now are pretty good, but I don't carry a lot of guilt, but I do carry some anxiety. Like when I'm around them, like I think maybe making sure that I feel good about myself is something that I pay attention to, because I'd rather shut up than say something awkward or something disrespectful. And I don't know that we've all together broken a few little things like that. I mean, it's because we think we know each other, whether we do or don't. I don't know. Maybe I do carry a little more anxiety
Well,
or fear more than the guilt.
yeah. I think, for me personally, I too have processed through and understood that I'm not responsible for what happened to, within our family, or to me personally, how I was treated maybe as a child or a teen. I think now I just question sometimes now whether I am relating, especially to my dad, because the breakdown was with my dad primarily too. Now am I doing everything that a good Christian woman should do to maintain relationship with a dad who has never acknowledged the harm maybe that he caused, not maybe that he caused, the harm that he caused. And I just talking about that here and thinking about that, I'm realizing that I am still living with some of the Bill Gothard type pressure of, you must maintain this specific kind of relationship with a father, and Rebecca's rolling her eyes, no matter what, because he is your father and he deserves all the respect no matter what. And
the idea that if you
take loose from.
for sure.
Go ahead, Sarah.
And the idea that if you do that all right and follow the 10 steps or however many there are, that you will have that beautiful relationship, that the fact that beautiful relationship isn't there means that you have failed somehow. And that's simply not biblical. It's not part of the grace of God that meets us right where we're at, shows us our responsibilities, and there's clear lines. And I would say I've worked through it too. I struggled with a lot of guilt in the first few years after I said, this is the direction I'm going with my life. I was actually told that, because I was a rebel, that any rebellion that my younger siblings manifested after that was at least partly my fault, because I had let, a spirit of rebellion into the home. And so it was very painful to watch younger siblings struggle with the Lord, with their relationship with the Lord and their needs in their life. And every time I would ask myself, wow, what if I just stayed home? I mean, I was 23 before I left home. And so it wasn't like I was a runaway or something, and our siblings' lifespan was 20 years. So if I, from the oldest to the youngest, so if I had waited till they were all grown, I would have been home quite a long time. But all that to say that I still struggled with wondering, well, maybe God wanted me to just stay there till I was, 38 and raise my siblings. But then the Lord really laid it clearly on my heart. God gave those children to my parents. I'm not their mom and dad. And secondarily, those children, I can't save them. That is the work of Christ. And that is, so between those two people is where the primary responsibility lays. And my responsibility is to manifest before them the life of Christ. And if I cannot do that in a healthy way in that situation, then it's my obligation to put myself in a place where I can thrive spiritually and give them a vision and a hope for a spiritually and relationally strong walk with the Lord.
That's good.
I don't know. I don't think that every relationship means that you keep sticking your neck out again and again I mean, like you
Right.
can have respect and you can have some kind of functioning relationship, but whether people are willing to ever listen, or, there's just some relationships, I think, where you have to have those boundaries, and it's not
Mhm.
wrong to have certain boundaries that be like, you don't necessarily have to tell them everything that's going on in your life, or you don't necessarily have to, like there's no one box for a godly relationship. And sometimes having healthy boundaries to, prevent being manipulated or guilted or just a bunch of things, I think that's fine. Like
Mhm.
and sometimes people can feel like the Christian guilt that I must keep opening up myself again, even if it keeps getting me hurt, or surely I must not be doing enough. I mean, those kind of like Christian guilt things, when I hear them, definitely feel very irritating, because I just like you know what I mean? Like, come
Yeah.
on, you don't need
Yeah.
to feel that guilt. You can have you can have some distance. It's okay. Maybe
Right.
it's healthy.
Right. And it's a lot easier for me. I'm guessing it's this way for a lot of people. It's a lot easier for me to look at you and say that to you about your
Yes.
situation. But when it's my own situation, it's like, well, am I doing all that I should and can? But I
Yes.
agree with you, Rebecca. I would love to differentiate a little bit between respect versus honor.
Mhm.
I think it is so important to honor others, even if they are not or have not behaved in ways that are deserving of respect.
Mhm.
We still
Mhm.
honor.
Yes.
We still are called to honor, and that honor does not give a free pass
Mhm.
Mhm.
to bad behavior or to toxic ways of relating or to abuse. Does not give a free pass. Honor actually will set boundaries that will boundary out that kind of behavior and will not allow someone to continue sinning relationally.
Mhm.
And so I think that's kind of what you were getting at, Rebecca, that am I right? That the
Mhm.
boundaries are there not necessarily just to keep me from getting hurt, but to prevent the other person from continuing with a pattern that is harmful, that is,
Mhm.
it's thwarting them in some of those patterns. And that's the most loving thing to do, right? The most
Mhm.
loving thing to do for someone is to thwart them from sin, whatever
Mhm.
sin that takes, that whatever shape that sin takes. And
So
that is
Mhm.
the most honoring thing to do. Go ahead, Sarah.
as just I always want to be practical myself, but
Yes.
people say healthy boundaries, healthy boundaries, healthy boundaries. What does that look like for each of you in your varied relationships? Where do you draw the line? Is it always about saying no to people, or is it about saying sometimes yes, I can do X, Y, or Z? Yeah. What do healthy boundaries look like for you, Judy, for you, Gwen, for you, Roseanne?
Hmm. Yeah, that's one thing I've decided. I'm not going to speak disrespectfully to any of my family. That's one of the things that I've done. And if they speak disrespectfully about me or to me, and it doesn't happen often. I don't know even when there's conversations that happen that I'm like, whoa, I don't really like the way that feels, but then I have to ask whether that's me or them. But
Mhm.
if somebody engages me in a way that I don't feel comfortable with, either I need to follow it up or be quiet and go do something else. And usually in company of my family, I'll just go off, do something different.
Step out of the situation.
Yeah. I used to call ourselves sort of like one of these loud families. We'd always say what we think and feel, and whether I don't know whether it was kind or not. And I've I learned years ago, you just can't do that. And we've all grown up since, but that's how we would have been as children and stuff, really engaging in a lot of verbal scuffles. And occasionally somebody will just sort of fall back into this slight pattern of like just saying something disrespectful. And me included, I've caught myself doing it. And I'm like, wait a minute, this isn't who you want to be. So that's one of the boundaries that I've made. You know, I'm never going to say something bad, even if it's joking, because bad or it's disrespectful joking is still disrespectful. And I don't need to say it. So that's one thing I've personally paid attention to in my life. And I just, I'm not very wealthy. Most of the time I'm living on, you know, $50, you know, or something like that. But and that's another thing. I won't go on expensive family vacations with my family because I'm realizing that I don't really want to have them pay for me to do something like that, because even though they could afford it, I don't want to be a user, somebody that takes from them. And it just doesn't feel good to me. And I think it might be more about me than it is about them, but it just, yeah, so that's another boundary.
I think for me, the boundaries are that I refuse to let pressure rule the way I will respond or participate in family activity. I want to be sensitive to how my participation or lack thereof affects family members, and I'm thinking about both my husband's family and my family. But yeah, Mennonite culture we can use a lot of shame to pressure each other into certain types of responses and behaviors. And so I've really chosen to step away from allowing that kind of pressure to rule me. Similar to Rosanna's family, my family has used we grew up using a lot of sarcasm. We just knew how to cut each other with words. And while I can handle some sarcasm, you know, and recognize that it's not all meant to bite and cut. Personally, I don't use a lot of sarcasm anymore because I know how damaging it can be. And if that style of relating, if that comes up, you know, in my family, I just step away. I don't participate. And there've been times when, you know, I'm with my family and conversations happen or things happen. And I'll just go outside and go for a walk, clear my head, step away. And that's just my way of like not getting pulled into the drama and giving myself space to clear. Now, I don't live near my family. I think I've thanked God for that. Actually, I don't know if this speaks to my need for growth yet, or if it's just a mercy God has given me, but I am thankful that I have that space, because I feel like I can have better relationships with my family, living at a distance. And so when we are together, we're together for, you know, chunks of time for a weekend. And so we're in close quarters, and there's not space. And so I just step away. I go for a walk, or, you know, run to the store for something, because we always are needing something when we're together as a family. And then it's just, and it gives me that space to clear my own head and to prevent me from doing something or saying something that I will regret. And it also lets my family, it speaks to them of what I will accept and tolerate and what I won't. And I have also gotten bolder at speaking up, you know, and just speaking up how certain things affect me. And some of my siblings have also moved into real growth, and that's been really helpful too. And with my dad, who is the one in my family whom I really don't have much of a relationship with, I can't, I don't really do well with the pretense that everything is okay. And so when that starts to come up, again, I just kind of remove myself. I don't want to get in his face or be disrespectful or call him out. But when some of the pretense that everything is okay and we're, we're this wonderful, happy, connected family starts to come up in conversation, I'm not going to call it out, but I'm not going to participate in it either. So that, I don't know, that's a boundary, I suppose, that I've set for myself. What does it look like for you, Sarah?
Yeah, I also live pretty far away from most of my family, so I don't have a lot of time together with them. But I do, yeah, I don't know that I have set a lot of boundaries. For me, I would say one thing that I don't know if it's a boundary or if it's a permission I've given myself, and that is I don't actually hear a lot from my family, but I've given myself the permission to not feel unwanted and to reach out anyways and to insert myself in their life like I belong there because I do. And
Yeah,
I think, yeah, we all understand here on this podcast, but my family just went through a painful loss of one of my siblings. And something that I've just been meditating on a lot is we are the ones that show up when these things happen, when there's death, when there's birth, when there's marriage, ultimately. And our family is still strong enough, and I'm thankful for that, that we do all show up for those things. And so sometimes feeling like the black sheep of the family in certain ways can make me just want to sit back and be quiet, but to give myself permission to be part of the conversation, to bring my thoughts to the table, even if they're super, super different from everyone else. So I'm not sure if I would call that a boundary as much as I would call it a permission.
Yeah. That's good. I think that's what a lot of what I was saying. I like that. I would call it too a permission more than a boundary. A permission that I don't have to stay there and pretend that everything is hunky dory. A permission that I don't have to. I can step away from conversations that start to get a little biting or a little that trigger me in some way. I give myself that permission. And I suppose in a sense that's boundarying it out maybe, but it's a permission maybe more than a boundary. I like that terminology. That's good. To give ourselves permission to, I think, for me too, is to give myself permission to like still be being sanctified in some of this stuff. I mean, there are still things that happen that take me back, and all of a sudden I'm 15 again and, trapped and helpless. And, of course I'm an adult now, I can talk myself out of that. No, Judy, you're almost 50 and you're not 15 anymore, but it surfaces some of those feelings, and to give myself the permission to step away and collect myself. It's necessary for me to be able to maintain the relationships that I do have.
Do you think with our families, like the potential of being hurt is a whole lot, I don't know, more, I think families can hurt us the most, and we want their approval because they are ours. They've always been ours. Our mothers, our fathers, our brothers, for me, sisters, for y'all. They're the ones whose opinions really matter. And I think that I know that I have to analyze, am I going to be brave enough to I don't know, let them know this? I do, but sometimes it's a little embarrassing because I view myself as being the inferior one in the family, because of the loss of my, me marrying, start over.
Separation.
yeah, because of my separation and you know, raising the children, it's been traumatic for me. And
Yeah.
I did not, when I was married, I did not tell my family things that were going on. And I have never told them all of it. And I don't know if I ever will. The potential we have of maybe my husband someday repenting, I don't want to have him to have to live anything terrible down. But yeah, those things did impact my family, and some of the things that I think about when we're together, you know, and I'm seeing the close knit relationships they have with their spouses, and it hurts. And when I'm seeing their freedom to be family together, you know, beings that they all live together. My brothers see each other about every day. I don't know, they know each other. They're in each other's lives, and it's really different between me and them. And to try to sometimes I just don't address that stuff, and I don't know that I ever will for sure yet. But
And I think the dynamic of, you know, the abusive marriage that you were in and the separation now, and maybe there's an element of being misunderstood by your family and some of that that makes it difficult to think that they may even want to try to understand. I think what I've done,
but it's kind of like they had questions, some that I didn't want to answer because I don't want to make other people look bad. Not anything to do with my family. I don't want to involve.
Yeah.
There's just so much I don't share with them, whether I could or not. But there's things that I'll only share with my best friends, you know, and the people that have been there for me.
I think that's where that's another permission I've given myself, if you will, is that you mentioned the whole thing of like, we want our family's approval and acceptance more than anyone else.
So there's this fear rocking the boat.
Yeah. And I've stepped away from that. I mean, from the time I left home, I didn't have that acceptance or approval for a long time. Not actually, when I married my husband, that my parents really respected him, and so that sort of restored me to approval. But through that whole process and since, I've given myself the permission to not need their approval, and it's been really freeing. It's actually freed me up to be more honest and more vulnerable, forthright, kind. I try very hard to be kind because I don't want to cause harm. I do want to honor, but that need for approval, that is where I get my most approval. As you were talking about that, I'm thinking like, where do I most feel the desire for approval and acceptance? It'll actually be with my church family. I mean, our church family has become our family, really, in many ways. And there is still, like, you have history with your family of origin that gives you a connection or a perspective, or you have your little things you remember and laugh about together, and the memories and all that. And you don't have, I don't have that at my church family. I've only been there 10 years, but the permission to not need that to release them from giving me approval has been really freeing.
I remember when I was the only girl in my family, and I was always excited about my brothers getting married and me potentially having sisters, you know, sister-in-laws. But it's never going to be like me having a sister. But it's been fun to have them in the family. But also, I do remember right at first wondering, like, is my mom going to still love me? You know, we're close though. And she still does. But it was kind of funny because I never imagined, I never had to worry. I mean, I was in my late 30s, I think, till I got a sister-in-law. And now my mom loves them
Wow.
and she loves her grandchildren and stuff, you know, but she still loves me. And it's still, you know,
There's enough love to go around.
yeah, it's just kind of funny though, because I remember being kind of shocked and horrified at that feeling.
Yes. One thing I would say that I found as I've gotten older is a greater understanding of the struggles and the weaknesses that our parents faced.
Mhm,
Things that were so easy to blame them for
mhm,
as young adults and as teenagers. You start to develop a more humble opinion of your own spiritual giantness,
mhm,
and to recognize that, yeah, they were reaching for the grace of Christ too in their own way. And one verse that always really speaks to me is Romans 15:7. It says, "Wherefore receive ye one another as Christ also received us to the glory of God." And you know how Christ received us in our sin, in our brokenness, in our ugliness. He received us totally, redeemed us, and transformed us.
mhm,
And when, yeah, we have to have, it has to not be a wounding relationship. Like, we don't have to make ourselves vulnerable to being abused, but
mhm,
a heart of reception towards our family for God's glory goes
mhm.
a long way
Yeah.
to bridge those gaps and remind us to be kind, to be gentle, to be understanding in all the darkness of our misunderstandings and relationships.
Mhm.
Um, that's a really good point, and something that I've thought about too, especially as my children have grown and I begin to understand that there's a lot of things pushing and pulling on me as a
Mhm.
parent.
Yes.
Mhm.
There are going to be things my kids have to forgive me for. There are going to
Mhm.
be things that I hope that I have the I try now to have the humility to go back to them and say, this hurt you, I wronged you. And I
Mhm.
hope as they continue to grow and are able to process through, I would really like to be able to do, I don't know, probably a lot of you guys follow Dorcas Smucker's blog. She
Mhm.
had a blog post a while back about how she sat down with her daughter to just hear her daughter out and to do something her own mother had done with her, to hear her out and just to hear from her daughter about, what were the things that hurt her growing up.
Mhm.
And she sat and she listened, and her daughter, felt free to, because Dorcas made the space for it, to speak of some of the things that had hurt her as a child, as a teen, as a whatever. And Dorcas's own mom had done that, so she had this model. And then when it was all said and done, she asked her daughter, "Can I tell you some of what I really was feeling then? I did not,
Mhm.
I did not reject you," or whatever it was. But I, just acknowledging that the daughter had reason to feel that way. Her daughter had reason to feel that way. But here's what was going on for me at that time. And when it was all said and done, Dorcas's daughter said to her, "Wow, it's like that stuff didn't even happen. Like, it's so erased because she was
Wow.
heard, comforted, validated, all the things." And Dorcas owned and acknowledged all those things, explained so her daughter could understand what was going on. And it was as if all of that was erased. I would really like to be able to do that for my children. And reading that blog post, made me stop and think. I know that my mother battled depression until I was in my adolescence. And she got some help for it. So of course that affected the way she parented me. And just having that, being able to receive, like the scripture you read, Sarah, to receive her fully, to allow my parents to be flawed,
Mhm.
and to even release them from the demand or the expectation that they
Yeah.
must own everything that they did wrong or whatever.
Mhm.
That's not even fair. That's not fair to put that on them. I do think that when there has been harm done,
Yes.
that it is important to own it. And if someone cannot own the harm they've done, they are not trustworthy. And we
Mhm.
are not required to you cast our pearls before swine. I mean, that's
Yes.
pretty rough
Mhm.
way of saying it, but yeah, we're not required to do that and to open ourselves wide open and like Rebecca said, put our head on the chopping block again.
Yes,
But
100%.
recognize, with my own dad, I recognize that some of the things he experienced, some of the rejection and the trauma he experienced as a child and young man definitely shaped him in the way he could relate to us as his children. And I know my dad
Mhm.
loved me. I know that. But he also harmed me. And I think it's important for all of us to be honest about our stories. I do not honor my father, my mother, my family when I pretend everything was wonderful.
Yes.
I don't honor them either when I only pay attention to what was not wonderful and totally
Mhm.
ignore what was good. Honor involves honesty about both what was good and what was not.
Mhm.
Honesty with kindness, that's honor. And so we have to be honest about what we experience if we're going to have healthy relationships. Anyway, Gwen was gone for a bit. Gwen's internet cut out on her and she was missed about 20% of the conversation, or 20 minutes at least of the conversation. Gwen, what do you have to add to this? We'd like to hear from you.
Well, I've appreciated what I've heard shared, and I would have been glad to hear the rest. But in this thing of being honest with our stories, it's something that we discussed between us the other night when we were discussing this, that I think is worth going over again, is what that honesty looks like and how it. I'll back up. As a young person, I steadfastly refused to speak truth about some really difficult things in my family because of the teaching about honoring our parents. And I rooted it. I don't know that anybody told me the story of Ham in that light, but I took the story of Ham and how he went out and told his brothers, Dad's in there drunk and naked, and you got to come see this, guys, and then he was cursed, and the brothers who backed up with the blankets and covered their father's nakedness were honored and blessed. And I took that to mean that you don't speak of your parents' flaws or sins. Even when I would hear somebody give a testimony of deliverance from the awful damage their parents had done to them, while I could be blessed by it, I question, how can it be okay to expose your parents' nakedness? Now, I finally got to the point where I realized that on some level, when I hurt somebody else, that becomes their story. They are not speaking of evil of me inherently by telling what happened to them. Each person has the right to be honest with their own story. And I believe that we can be honest with the harm done to us by others without being disrespectful or evil speaking has been really distorted, I believe, because when we're honestly telling what happened to us, we are not inherently speaking evil of somebody else. I believe that evil speaking is a motive. And when our motive is to speak healing to somebody else by sharing our story, then we are not speaking evil of somebody. We're just being honest with our story. But lest there are others who are hung up on that old Ham story, I would love, Judy, if you would share what you shared with us the other night about what you learned from the Bible Project about the story of Ham.
Well, yeah, the sin of Ham had nothing to do with Ham speaking evil of his father whatsoever. In fact, I was just looking here. Oh shoot, it went away. But in I believe it's in the book of Leviticus. Yeah. no less than 17 times in Leviticus 18 alone, Moses used the phrase uncover the nakedness of as a euphemism for sexual intercourse, and particularly for the sin of incest. And so that story has nothing to do with how we speak of our parents, but rather Ham, when his father was too drunk to know what was going on, would have had sex with his father's wife, and the outcome of that was a son named Canaan, whom Noah cursed. And I remember reading that story in the past and going, why in the world was Ham's son Canaan so cursed? Like, what did he do to deserve? Well, it wasn't what he did to deserve. It was not his fault either that he was the product of such a union, but because of that, he was cursed. And so if that story is misconstrued to be some kind of, or twisted into some kind of instruction that we must not ever speak of anything wrong that our parents have done or speak evil of them or whatever, that is a complete misapplication of that story. It's a twisting, and it's another case of where we don't know how to. We're not reading the scripture from the standpoint of culture and context, and we're misapplying meaning to the story.
Inevitably, our families have probably hurt us in some ways, and our families may continue to occasionally make mistakes. And one of the things that I think that I intend to pass along to my children is the fact that I'm not perfect either. And I'm sure that someday they will say things about me and to me, Mom, and they have done this already. Mom, do you realize what you said or how that made me feel? And I'm going to have to go back and apologize for it. And as we were raised by our parents, sometimes we tend to try to raise our children without paying particular attention to it. And rather than continue a cycle of generational trauma or mistakes, each of us are learning from our families or have learned from our families of things to do and things not to do, and to use that wisely for the knowledge and benefit of our children and our future health. It's going to be integral to drop our pride or our unease about being honest with our families.
Yeah, I will venture to say that if we are unwilling to be honest about, some of the problems in our families of origin, we will not get free of the cycle. We will perpetuate the same things on our families. We have to look at what went wrong in our family of origin, so we can deal with it in our own lives and change the patterns, because we learn those patterns. I mean, I had to deliberately step away from the patterns of relating in sarcastic ways, because it was the humor we used, but it wasn't helpful. Yeah. And I go ahead, Sarah.
I think the number one thing I want to pass on to my children is like what Sarah nicely shared the other day. She said, boundaries come down to defined identity. If I know who I am, and I'll insert here who I am in Christ, I won't let anyone mar that. Yes. And if we can pass on to our children, the most important thing is who Jesus sees you as. Just to help them find that security and the identity in Christ alone. Heals a lot of those things. I know it was very healing for me to find my approval and my identity in the love of Christ, in the boundless, limitless, love of Christ.
Yeah. Whether we crave that from our family of origin or like where I'm tempted to crave it from my church family, that's not where it's at. It's in Christ and who he says I am. That's powerful. And maybe a great way to wrap this episode up. To heal, to grow, identity is key. Knowing Jesus for who he really is, not who we've been told he is, but who he really is, and knowing what he says, learning to hear his voice, what he says about us. that's where it's at. Well, thank you for joining us, and we will see you, speak at you in the next episode. The Kingdom Women Podcast is a member of the Kingdom Outpost Podcast Network. For more articles and podcasts and resources regarding living in the kingdom, go to www.kingdomoutpost.org.